Thanks everybody for coming to the last session here. Let me a quick show of hands. Did anybody come to the event-driven infrastructure panel yesterday? Okay, a couple of you. Cool. So that's mostly what I'm going to be talking about is event-driven infrastructure. Specifically, I'm going to talk about integrating some external event sources with Salt. Fancy stuff. Okay, keep going. So quickly about me, I'm Jason Denning. I'm a DevOps engineer. I've been using SaltStack for like 3 years. I'm SSCE number 2. I do a lot of AWS stuff, particularly at my last gig where these guys still work. Been using Linux for, it seems like too long at this point. I vastly prefer to code in Python, so if I make any Ruby jokes throughout the talk, I apologize. Jason Denning on GitHub, Jason Denning on Twitter. Full disclosure, I've literally never used Twitter. I do have the account, but if somebody wants to pull me into a conversation, sure. I work for Upsight. We do mobile analytics and marketing and segmentation. We have a couple of web-based APIs. If you've ever played a game on your phone, you've probably hit one of our APIs. Lots and lots of traffic. We have APIs worldwide, and we use Salt extensively in our stack. So, start off, I think there's one true answer to this. What's the #1 goal of any DevOps or sysadmin? Anybody? Work less. Close. I say keep your pager from going off. That's my definite #1 goal in life, is to sleep more and longer. And that's really what this is all about. I think that event-driven infrastructure has a lot of potential to build like self-healing apps, cause problems as soon as they come up, respond dynamically to various monitoring events. The sky's the limit, really. We went into the sort of use cases in more detail yesterday, so I won't go too much into it. But really, this is the point, is that anything that happens in your infrastructure can be classified as an event. And Salt provides a lot of great tools for dynamically reacting to those events. So it's more automation, more stuff you don't have to worry about. So yeah, it's basically what we're going to be talking about, integrating Salt with external sources of events. I'm going to cover 3 kind of use cases, some more than others. You can use the Net API to get events into your infrastructure, custom minion side code, and the new beacons functionality, which is coming in 2015.2, I believe, should be in there. Why? I kind of went through this. The Salt Reactor is super easy to use. It's a really good way to get started with this kind of stuff. You can use the same SLS templating tips and tricks that you already have. Salt's event bus is great. The current one with ZMQ is great. The new one with rate is going to be even better. I'm really stoked about that coming out. This usage of the event bus is actually the primary reason I started using Salt personally. Keeps everything nice and asynchronous. You know, it's great. There's lots of flexibility. There's lots and lots of things you can do. It's really just limited by what you can wrap your brain around about things you care about. So an event, it's nothing fancy. It's anything that you care about. Typically with a timestamp. An event tends to happen at a particular time. As far as Salt is concerned, it's a timestamp plus a tag plus data. And events are really whatever you want them to be. If you want to monitor a newspaper feed to see if your company gets mentioned and auto-scale up in response to that, that can be an event. If you want to look for Twitter mentions or look for systems crashing in other infrastructures. Say you have 2 data centers and one goes down. Maybe you want to spin up more nodes. Again, EDI, all we're talking about is automatically modifying your infrastructure in response to events. You're probably already modifying your infrastructure in response to events, but manually. Like something happens, you go SSH in and do some stuff, or go to Salt and fire some stuff off. The most common place everybody sees EDI is in auto-scaling. Is anybody using AWS? Yeah, so I mean, this is essentially what auto-scaling is. You know, you have your alarm set up. When the alarms goes off, it triggers an auto-scaling rule, which either spins more instances up or spins instances down. But this is a really limited use case. You can see how powerful it is because so many people use auto-scaling, right? But it's really just the tip of the iceberg. It's this very small, small slice of what you can do. Salt, from a certain perspective, is already an event-driven infrastructure. And this is how. So this diagram is kind of a simplified overview of how Salt works. Up here, we fire a command off on the master, right? So we're just saying on minion.1 to, oh, sorry, I edited these slides kind of last minute to, I made some changes given recent developments I found out about at SaltConf. So yeah, pretend there's a command there. But when you run that, it's going to pass this message, which is the event that we care about, into the master's message bus, and that's where your ZMQ or rate functionality is. If something comes up, sure.
How much have you used rate to this point?
Not at all. I was very skeptical about it until I went to Tom's advanced concepts class on Tuesday, and now I'm kind of sold on it. It sounds really, really cool.
Oh, it looks wonderful on the slide. I just didn't know.
No, I haven't actually used it. It just looks great. It has a lot of promise. If everything goes as claimed, I think it's going to be awesome. It's at the end of the day, though, it's really the same kind of thing. Rate is just a more reliable, the encryption seems better. It's going to be more performant, but otherwise it's the same concept. We just have this message bus, right? So we got our message on the master's message bus. It goes over the network, or maybe running on the same host in an encrypted fashion, which is nice. This is one of the benefits of using Salt for this kind of stuff. So you get the encryption, get the PKI, all built in for free. And then that message gets pushed over to the minion's message bus. There are two. There's one on the master, one on the minion. And it's kind of interesting. In the near future, I think they are going to start pulling out minion-side reactors. So you can have a reactor running just on the minion that's listening for events, does special stuff. Mostly we're going to be talking about running stuff from the master in this talk. Then you have the Salt daemon running on the minion, and it gets this message, and it does stuff. And then gets some results, presumably. Sends another message back to the minion side bus, which forwards to the master. So the master gets this event on its bus, and then that goes back into the Salt master daemon. This is a little overview of what the message structure looks like. So on this first line here, this is just an example of how you would fire an event from the command line using salt call from a minion. So pretty straightforward. It's just like any other execution module. You do event.firemaster. Then you put the data payload is the next thing you do. It's a dictionary. And then the tag that you want to use. On the master side, this is what you get back. It's formatted a little differently, but I did this way so it's readable. You get the tag that you send out, and that's important. And then this data payload, which contains a timestamp. It has the command that was run, typically. It'll show the ID of the minion that sent the event. Kind of replicates the tag down here. This is just because it's using this particular execution module. And then the data that you put in the payload goes in this data key right here. For reacting to events, there's 3 ways, basically, as I see it. There's the reactor, which is great. It's easy, quick to get started. You can write custom code using the Salt client API, just Python code. And then there's this new thing, engines, which I think is going to be like 2 releases out. Anybody heard about engines so far in SaltConf? A little bit? OK, we'll go into them in more detail later in the talk. Really cool stuff. So first off, the reactor. Does just what we expect. It listens for specific events on the master's bus. And by specific events, I mean tagged a certain way. That's that tag parameter we were setting previously. The real nice thing about it is it uses SLS files. So you don't have to know any code. You don't have to do anything fancy. It's easy to get started. It's a little limited in what it can actually do. It can run execution modules on minions. It can target them dynamically based on the data payload. You can use Jinja tricks to decide what minions you're going to hit. It can use any Salt runners. So as we know, Salt runners are basically just like execution modules, but they run on the master side, right? And it can run wheel commands, which who knows what wheel is? Anybody use it? Yeah, OK, so it's for modifying the config on the master. Most typical use case is for like accepting keys or removing keys. To use the reactor, you've got to have sort of like a top file. It can go straight in your master config. I think a more common use is to make a separate reactor.conf file and put it in your master D directory. And it's real simple. You just have the reactor key, and then you have a list of all the tags that you care about. All right, so this is an example of a tag that I care about. Foo, my tags, stuff. Again, you can have hierarchical namespacing, so do that. And what this is saying, it's telling the master daemon that if we get an event that has this tag, then go run this reactor SLS file. Down below it, this is the SLS file, or an example. Again, it's real similar to all the other SLS files you use. Give it an ID, which I'm just calling it do stuff. In this example, this would be running an execution module on the minion. So you go local.command.run, and then that works just like the execution module command.run. So we give it a target, TGT, excuse me. This can be anything. You can target with grains. You can do complex targeting. Again, it works just like you expect. And then this arg parameter is what you would type next to the command.run file. So these parts will vary a little bit depending on what execution module you're running, obviously. Like this is the syntax for command.run. Questions on this? Is this clear? This is a little closer to what I'm currently doing. This is using some custom Python. This would be running on the master side. It's pretty straightforward. This is kind of a nonsensical example, but the key points are all here. You want to import this local client event class. And then this is just some pretend function that I have that would actually do the thing that you want to happen. You initialize the client so that you can actually listen to these events. And all you have to do is give it the socket. You can also do this with like the options directory and various other ways. There's lots of ways to do this. And in fact, this is kind of an older style way of doing it. I believe, I don't know what version it changed. There's more useful stuff in the salt.utils.event module now that make this a little easier. Yeah.
Not to do stuff and throw in, do you actually publish your reactors?
I don't have any up right now. I will. I don't know. I mostly use them for work, so I don't actually have direct permission to, put anything out open source. But Most of the stuff that I've been doing is about integrating with CloudFormation, with AWS, and that's actually I did that a lot more at my last gig than I'm doing at my current job. I use some custom resources with CloudFormation, and that's what I do with a lot of this stuff. So it's, I don't know, there's not much to it, really. Where was I? Right, okay, so we got our listener, our client. We just have this little loop that's going to go through and iterate all the events, and I'm specifying that I only care about this particular tag, foo/bar. This is how you get the data out of it. It's just a dictionary. So we just use a standard Python get and get the data attribute of the dictionary. Then again, this is just the type of stuff that I like to do is that then when I have that data payload, I will get another parameter out of it and then do some sort of logic based on that. So what I'm saying here is if there's some arg that has a value of do stuff, then we run this do stuff function with the whole event. If it's not there, then do other stuff. Right? So it's really, again, it's just a contrived example to show you where you start injecting your logic. But really, they don't get much more complicated than this. The only other thing that I do a lot is I'll look for a particular minion ID, because in this event payload, you'll see what minion sent the event up to the master, and I find that handy for securing stuff, right? Like I don't necessarily want to take these events from just any minion on my network. I can say I have this one minion that actually is responsible for creating these events, and that's the main reason I prefer to use this custom code over the Reactor stuff, is because if you want to do this in Reactor, you can still do it, but you have to do a lot of GenJ stuff, and I think this is a little clearer. Let's skip one. Oh, okay. So this is one of my newer slides. So this is an example of how the engines work. So since it seems like not many people are up on engines, they are a new modular subsystem in Salt. Like I said, that they won't be out in 2015.2. Like Tom committed these like 3 days ago. It was like, yeah, Monday morning, yeah, so brand new. The intent is that these are places to put long-running code that you want to run with your master daemon. So I think this is going to be super handy. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if they re-implemented reactors using engines. That would not surprise me at all, although I haven't heard anything to that. Right, yeah, as you commented, they are just an extension of reactors. Although my understanding is they don't necessarily have to tie into the event bus. Like you can use any sort of long-running code. These engines are super simple. All you have to have is a function called start, and it just runs the code. Right? So this is pretty much ripped out of the test engine that Tom made on Monday. Again, pretty simple. This is using that, is it? Yeah, this is using the newer sort of code style with this extra helper in utils.event, because you have this get master event function. This is a little bit cleaner way to do it, but I don't think it works in 2014.7. I'm not positive on that. In any case, I have not tested this code at all. Then you just do a while loop. Get an event off the bus, convert it to JSON, and then if it's not false or none, I assume it's none is what it comes back if there's no event in the loop, then do stuff. And in Tom's example, he's actually logging these events. So go check out that code. It's in Salt Engines test.py. Again, I'm really looking forward to these. These look easy to write, lots of cool use cases for this. Oh.
Jason,
Yeah.
why would you choose to write custom code instead of running the runner as a reaction to the reactor?
So the question was, why use custom code as opposed to using a runner? The only reason I tend to use custom code is because I generally want to do more stuff on the raw event before I decide where it's going to go, if that makes sense. Like with a reactor, you get the tag, and you can run a runner. And I guess you could have that runner, like then do authentication and stuff like that. I just prefer to do it kind of up front. Nobody in here came to my talk last year about this kind of stuff, I assume. So one of the things I've shown last year is doing like adding a TOTP token for like two-factor auth to firing off events. And that sort of thing is a lot easier to handle if you have some custom code that's just kind of taking care of it at the time. So like that custom code I showed, I would probably move over to using engines instead of having something else running. But you could totally use runners for it. But I don't think there's a real serious reason not to. Yeah, I mean, again, there's some of the stuff like verifying that an event came from a particular minion ID. That's kind of important to a lot of my use cases. And if you do it in the Reactor SLS using like a Jinja trick, then you're going to be blocking until that Jinja actually processes. So like if you're doing something fancy, like looking up in a database, something like that, if the minion is authorized from what's running, you could potentially be blocking for a while. I like to keep my master running kind of light. But yeah, more than one way to do it for sure. So back to engines. As I mentioned, they're used for long-running custom code. They have the same lifespan as the daemon. They were originally intended just for use on the master. As of yesterday, they can be used on minions if you're using the rate transport. Thanks, Matthew. I don't think he's here, but Matthew Williams wrote that, and it was like 5 lines of code or something like that. Okay, so moving on more to the meat here. External sources of events. There's really just a few categories that you can look at for these. As I said, events can come from anywhere, but how we're actually going to be interfacing with them tends to be one of these top-level items here. Webhooks are really common. You could picture having like a GitHub webhook, right? So that when you do a commit to your repo, it's going to call a particular URL and give you some data based on the push you made. So you can see why that might be useful. You know, automatically deploy out some code or spin up a new staging environment to test the new code, those sorts of things. Trello, same thing, right? Like there's lots of external services that use this sort of webhook model. External message queues. This is one I have personally used a lot. As I said, that a lot of my use cases involving CloudFormation with Amazon, which is like a orchestration tool for AWS. When you're running a CloudFormation template, it will send out events to an SNS topic, which is their sort of notification system. And those SNS topics can also use a webhook, but then you've got to have a web server up that's publicly accessible. Another option with that is you can have them forward to an SQS queue, which is Amazon's message queue as a service, and then just long pull that queue. You know, you could also use Rabbit or whatever. If you have some message queue already that you're pushing stuff, then this makes a lot of sense going there. And then, of course, any non-salt code running on any of your minions are another nice source of external events. If you have Git repos just on the minion, you can put little hooks in those repos. Docker has events. iNotify, you know, if files are modified or created. Bash scripts, any kind of Python code you want to do. And, you know, whatever else. I don't want people to feel like you're limited to these things. There's definitely lots of ways to hook this up. Like if you had a cell phone hooked up to your server and it could read text messages, sure. I mean, whatever's important to you. I guess a more realistic case would be a thermostat in your server room. So pulling these external events into the Salt bus. There are a couple of ways to do this. Net API would work, but I wouldn't do it. I think it's a little bit insecure, and I'll go into that in greater detail in another slide. The salt call command, useful because there's a module that's just event.fire master, and you can push straight from the command line. That's great for bash scripts. Custom Python code. This is what I do typically these days. Beacons. This is another new thing. 2015.2, I believe, it's going to be available. Everybody heard about beacons? Yeah? Cool. And then, of course, these brand new minion-side engines. I'm really looking forward to that. And I'll hit most of these in more detail. So Net API. So it's pretty quick to get the Cherry Pie Net API module up, and then you can access any sort of commands you can run off your master. I could see a use case where this would be useful for webhooks. In fact, I think there's a guy who has a blog article about using GitHub webhooks with the Net API. I don't like it, though. I wouldn't do it myself. I think it's too much power. The Net API has access to everything on the Salt master, and of course you can restrict it, but there's just more potential for error there. This is really the big one. If you're using an external webhook, then your master has to be on a public IP, and that's something that I just don't do. Braver man than I. And yeah, security is more up to you. If you want to do this, go for it. I'm not going to tell you not to. I'm just saying I wouldn't. The salt call command, super easy, right? This is it right here. Salt call, event.firemaster, your data structure, and then your tag. I mean, you can integrate that with anything. I'm sure everybody here does some bash scripting, right? As I said, it's mostly useful for integrating shell scripts. It's also really useful if you want to manually trigger events. If you want to do any testing, or if you have something that you really only want to fire off manually, this is a great way to go. I use this a fair bit, actually, just for kind of one-off stuff. Huh. Looks like I lost part of my slide. Custom Python code. This is, again, just using the client API. This is what I tend to do the most of right now if I'm firing events off. I mentioned this use case of having events go from CloudFormation into SNS into SQS, and then I have some Python code running on one minion that just pulls that SQS queue periodically, grabs the events, shoves them up to Salt. Again, the code, like with all extensible parts of Salt, it's easy. That stuff doesn't get any easier than this. Import salt.client, initialize a caller interface, and then I like to kind of alias the event fire master function like this, and just do caller.sminion.functions, then event fire master, and then you have a new function, right? Fire master event, and it takes the exact same parameters as the salt call command line version, because that's what we're actually doing here. This is the same. This is how the salt call command works. It's just this little guy here. You can put anything, any modules you can run with salt call can go in here. A couple of tips on this. Namespaces are a honking great idea. Let's do more of that. Use your namespaces. This is that's the best tip. It helps you structure your thoughts about what events you care about. It helps you keep everything straight in terms of your code. It's a good tip for all of these, right? Whether you're using the reactor or whatever, use the namespaces. As I mentioned, I like to restrict which minions can fire which events, or rather what the master is actually going to listen to. On my master, if the event doesn't come from the right minion, it's not going to do it. Salt has a good PKI implementation for free. That's all the salt key stuff. You're guaranteed that the message came from the minion that it said it came from. So use that. It's hard stuff to do on your own. I like this pattern in general. Again, as I've mentioned, that you have some event source, and then you have some particular minion that's responsible for handling that event source, and then that minion fires stuff up to the master. This URL right down here at the bottom, this is the official doc on how to use the client API for Salt. It's worth a read. So beacons. I'm super excited about beacons. I really can't tell you how excited I am about beacons. This is what I'm going to switch over to immediately. As soon as February rolls around, right? It does basically what all that custom code I've been showing you does for free. It's a new modular system, and it's what it's made for. It runs on the minions, runs some code, and then it pushes an event back up to the master. It's going to have all the same niceties that custom extension modules do now, I assume, that you can distribute them out easily. So that's going to be great. You can configure them in the minion config file. A lot of the, I think that the configurable interval is going to be a common config parameter. No need to run an external process. That's something that sucks about the pattern I mentioned before, is if you have some custom code and you have to daemonize it, have it running all the time. It's another thing to watch, make sure it doesn't fall down. Now all you have to do is run it in your minion process. That's great. There are already several custom beacons. A lot of them are like new this week even. iNotify was the first one. And that's super awesome. I assume everybody knows what iNotify does. It's like a kernel function. It'll watch for file creation, watch for file modifications, any sort of inode events, and it'll push an event back to the master. That is awesome if you think about,
It's going to allow us to return a file to its current state while the developer is editing it.
Right, exactly. If you have anything you really care about and some developer comes in and starts messing with it, you could log him out even. Yeah, exactly. I've also seen that there's a wtemp, which is for logins and logouts on a Linux system. There's a system load beacon. There's a few in there now, and I anticipate this is going to scale up rapidly. So keep an eye on that directory. I imagine it will move faster than the documentation. It seems par for the course. I found out about beacons like 2 weeks ago when we had a little phone conference about the event-driven infrastructure panel, and it got mentioned there. And then I started looking into it and then got really excited. So cool.
I just didn't know if you were on, if there was an announced list or something as things rolled in.
They did announce it. It's in the 2015.2 changelog. But yeah, I look at that stuff. If I type GitHub into my browser bar, it'll autofill SaltStack. That's how much I'm on the repo. Yeah. Well, I didn't go to the fixing the docs talk, but I'm hoping that'll change a little bit. This is a short list of beacons that I want. I might write some of these soonish. If anybody else wants to write them first, that'd be great. I think it'd be cool to have some way to filter stuff out of log files automatically. So like logtail and grep, or maybe a logstash plugin, or Heka is cool. This guy right here, Don, turned me on to Heka. It's awesome. It's still really cool. Again, these other use cases I mentioned, local Git hooks. It just makes a lot of sense to have a beacon for that. Docker events, again, that's one I probably will write if nobody else does. I was also thinking it might be kind of cool to have some kind of combo iNotify plus YAML thing where you could have a directory that if you put a YAML file in there, it would just convert that to a data payload and send it along. I could see some fun use cases for that. So, minion side engines. This is really new. This was like yesterday. And the pull request was like 6 lines of code, what I heard. This is going to be awesome for long polling processes, like the thing I was mentioning about polling SQS. This is the way to do that, right? Or it's a good way to do that. And in fact, the first non-test engine, that's what it does, long polls SQS. Thanks again, Matthew. Matthew and I were talking at the happy hour, and I was telling him about how I do this CloudFormation into SNS and SQS stuff, and was talking about the long polling, and he wrote the engine for it the next day. So it's already in develop. I must have mangled my slides somehow. Anyways, in summary, as I think you see, there's lots of cool places where you can pull events out of. It's super easy to integrate. There's like no reason you shouldn't be doing this, at least at a small scale. Like, I think everybody can find some low-hanging fruit where this will save them some time. And really, it's like your imagination's the limit with it. You know, in this environment, in our tech community environment now, if you're the first guy to get something cool going, I mean, you win. That's the name of the game. So use this stuff. Get out there, make something really cool. Like, I could see new services, like new web services that do nothing but this, right? I mean, this is essentially what, like, Zapier, whatever, if this then that, this is what these guys do. It's get some incoming thing, do some stuff, and then trigger some outgoing message. And again, you get all of this cool stuff for free. That's the real punchline to take away. Salt makes doing all of these things extremely easy. So yeah, go forth, event-driven infrastructures. So yeah, thank you. It's my email, it's my GitHub, and again, I do have a Twitter account. I've never used it, but I'm happy to have people tag me. Any questions? Cover them all in line, I guess. Does that make sense? Any criticisms? True that.
Small criticism where your microphone's placed when you move your head, sometimes it would kind of drift it out.
Oh, yeah. Blame that guy. Yeah, I'll put them up. I don't know, I'll put them on SlideShare. I think Salt is Salt doing the slides. I assume it goes with these videos. What's that? Recordings will be posted? Okay, yeah, I'll make sure to get it up on SlideShare. I think I'm like Jason Denning on SlideShare too, I believe. Yeah, I'll post a notice to the mailing list when I get them up. Cool. Well, thanks everybody.